It's my pleasure to introduce David Blei today. And many of you know David, I'm sure, from his work on topic models. And he got his degree at Berkeley with Mike Gordon, and has been faculty as a postdoc at CMU, and then faculty at Princeton and Columbia for the last few years. And has won tons of awards, like a presidential early career award, the Sloan Fellowship, and teaching awards, so lots of awards. So I'll tell you a couple things you might not know about him now. One is that he's a very fun guy to get together with at a conference. He does a great job of scouting out nice bars and restaurants and places. So he's the person to know at a conference. And the other thing is that this is something I didn't realize, but I had some inside knowledge. It turns out that one of Dave's students is interviewing here today. And told me that the last time Dave was in Canada, he picked up a skill that we haven't tried.
Oh, no.
He was in Montreal with Nips, and they convinced him to ride a mechanical bull. So I'm not sure that was part of the talk today. Anyways, welcome, Dave.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Rich, for the introduction. Rajesh is in trouble for telling you about the mechanical bull. So my name's Dave Blei, I'm going to talk about topic models today, probabilistic topic models and user behavior. So, first I want to just talk a little bit about what topic models are. Basically, I almost don't need to say it anymore, but as you know, we are inundated with massive amounts of data, especially text data or including text data. We have new needs to organize, visualize, summarize, build search engines, form predictions, generally understand and find structure in all of these big unstructured collections of text. And what topic modeling does is, loosely speaking, takes that big stack of books, uses an algorithm to uncover the hidden thematic structure that lives in those books, then organizes the books according to that hidden thematic structure, annotates the documents according to the topics it found, and then you can use those annotated books, that organized collection that you organized algorithmically, to do whatever it is you want to do, to visualize, organize, summarize, and so on. Okay, and so this is an old picture now of an example of what you can do with a topic model. You ingest a bunch of articles, and then you can display a map of what those articles are about. So each of the nodes in this graph represents a topic, a group of words associated under a single theme that the algorithm discovered. So here's one like genetic, population, differences, variation. And here we analyzed a bunch of articles from the journal Science, and we're just displaying the topics that the algorithm found. We analyzed 17,000 documents, and you can think of this as a summary of those 17,000 documents. Okay, we can look at topics that change over time. So this is now an analysis of 160,000 documents from Science. This is over the course of the collection from 1880 until the present day. And now a topic is not just one group of words, but a group of words that slowly changes. So here it starts with words like electric, machine, power, engine, battery, wire, and slowly changes through the decades, tube, apparatus, glass, mercury, and so on, and then to the present day device, devices, materials, technology, silicon. So what's happened here is we took in this big unstructured collection of documents, and we found these hidden themes. One of those themes looks like it's about scientific apparatus and the apparatus that people use to do science. These are science articles. And I want to emphasize here that the articles aren't marked up, so there's no metadata about this is the section about apparatus or whatever, anything like that. Rather, it's uncovering this as a pervasive pattern of word use. Okay, so recently we've been looking at topics to find events. So this is a picture from a recent paper we had in EMNLP, where we're analyzing 2 million telegrams sent between U.S. embassies in the 1970s and embellishing the topic model to help us find when something significant is happening in this collection. This is joint work with a historian. We can adapt topic models to capture different types of data. So here we're using a topic model to help us annotate images. And variants of this idea can be used to uncover overlapping community structure in large networks. And this is a large overlapping community structure analysis. This is a community of patents citing each other, but we're really just treating it as a big social network. And similar ideas have been adapted and were independently invented in the world of population genetics. So whereas we are uncovering the topics in documents, population geneticists are uncovering patterns of genes in people's genotypes. Okay, so what today's talk is about is that, at some point recently we realized that people read documents. Okay, and so here are two examples. Here's an example that's familiar to me. This is the New York City subway, probably familiar to some of you too. And so you can see a bunch of people there reading documents. And here's another example. This is Charles Darwin's library. Okay, so here's a picture, and you see Charles Darwin had all of these books on his shelf in his library. And, why are we interested in people reading documents? Well, first, these might be people for whom we want to form predictions. Okay, so, I might want to build a recommendation system for all the people on the subway to suggest to them what to read next. But two, I'm almost a little bit more interested in this. Readership data, user behavior data, is an additional signal about the meaning of the documents and the organization of the collection. And I'll make that more concrete and precise in this talk. But the idea is that, I just showed you a bunch of pictures where we're taking text. We don't know anything about who's reading it or what people are doing with it, and we're summarizing it. We're somehow summarizing the meaning of those texts in a picture using unsupervised learning. And the point here is that if we have data about who's reading those texts, that gives us more information to help us summarize those in interesting ways. And I'll show you that in the latter half of the talk. Okay, so in today's talk, I'm first going to give you an introduction to topic modeling. I'll try to be brief, but to set up the main ideas that we need for the second part. And in the second part, I'll talk about recommendation and exploration with collaborative topic models. This is topic models that include user behavior data. And then at the end, I just want to talk a little bit about, if there's time, the bigger picture, using probability models to solve problems with data, which is really what these topic modeling ideas are a part of. By the way, feel free, I don't need to get through the whole talk. Feel free to interrupt me with questions along the way. I'm happy to be interrupted. I like to be interrupted. Okay, can you all hear me? Okay. So, introduction to topic modeling. I'm going to describe for you the most basic topic model called latent Dirichlet allocation. And this is a statistical model of text that captures a simple intuition. And the intuition is that documents exhibit multiple topics. Okay, so here's a picture from Science Magazine again, and it's called Seeking Life's Bare Genetic Necessities. It's about determining the number of genes that an organism needs to survive in an evolutionary sense over millions of years. And what the authors of this article did was they used some data analysis techniques to determine that number. Okay? What I've done by hand here in this article, it's a typical article from Science, is I've highlighted different words with different colors. So words like survive and organism and life, words about evolutionary biology, I highlighted in pink. Words like genes and genomes and genetic and sequence, I highlighted in yellow. Those are words about genetics. And words like number and computer and predictions, words about data analysis, I highlighted in pink. The idea is, if I bothered and highlighted every word in that article, except for words like the and of, and then you looked at the article and you squinted, you wouldn't be able to read it, but you could tell me, well, I don't know what it's about, but it somehow blends data analysis, genetics, and evolutionary biology. Okay, moreover, this is one article in a big stack of articles, and the intuition is that there's some set of topics out there, okay, some number of colors that I can highlight words with, and every article in this stack somehow blends those different colors. Okay, so this article is about genetics and data analysis. The next one might be about neuroscience and government. Okay, so what we're going to do in latent Dirichlet allocation is embed that intuition into a formal statistical model of text. And the way it works is like this. So one way to describe a statistical model is to describe its generative process, the imaginary process by which it creates data. And for latent Dirichlet allocation, it works like this. So here on the outside are topics. Okay, so now I can define a topic for you. It's a distribution over terms. I have a vocabulary, say 10,000 terms, and each topic is a distribution over those 10,000 terms. So this topic has words like data, number, computer with high probability. This topic has words like brain, neuron, nerve with high probability, and so on. Okay, so these are the topics, and they live outside of the collection. And then for each document in my collection, I first choose a distribution over topics. Okay, so here I drew a cartoon histogram with pink, yellow, and blue bars. And then for each word in the document, I choose a colored button from that distribution. Here I chose the blue button. I look up which topic it's associated with, and I draw the word from that topic. I drew the word analysis. Okay, and I repeat this for every word in the collection. Here I chose a yellow button, and I chose the word genes. Here I draw the pink button, and I choose the word organism, and so on. Okay, and so the idea behind LDA is that the whole document's written that way. I just drawing colored buttons from this distribution and then drawing words from the corresponding topics. Okay, then I turn the page of science. I'm going to write a new article for science, and what do? I first choose a new distribution over topics. Okay, so that one might be, again, neuroscience and data analysis. And then I choose colored buttons from that distribution to choose that document's words. Okay, what's important here is that there is a single set of topics that describes the whole collection, but each document exhibits those topics with different proportions. Okay? If you're a statistician, you're drawing documents from a mixture model. The mixture proportions are document specific, and the mixture components are shared across the whole collection. Okay, and this is called a mixed membership model in statistics. Yeah, Tommy. Right, so there's a couple problems. No, so here we just have singleton words, although there are embellishments of this model, like Hannah Wallach worked on something called Beyond the Bag of Words that involved bigrams. One cheap thing we often do is just find bigrams in the text using an ad hoc technique and then put an underscore in between them and call them single words. That works well. Another issue that relates to what you asked about is that this ignores the word order. So the words are, if you really wrote an article this way, it would not be readable. However, our purpose, remember, is to understand the kind of broad semantic structure of the collection. And if the way you can stop worrying about word order is by imagining that you jumbled all the words in this article and then looked at it. You'd say, okay, something went wrong. However, I know that this has something to do with genetics. Right. Okay, so those are the generative assumptions behind LDA, and I just described for you a formal statistical model of a big document collection. Of course, the machine learning problem, the statistics problem, the algorithmic problem, is that we don't get to observe all of that fancy structure, right? We just get a big stack of documents, and our goal is to infer all of this hidden topical structure, right? I want to take my stack of documents and figure out what are the topics that describe those documents, and what are the topic proportions for each document, and maybe which topic did each word come from. Okay, that's the inference problem. All right, so in machine learning, as you know, we like to represent probability models as graphical models. Okay, and so I'm sure many of you are familiar with graphical models. In a graphical model, a node represents a random variable, an edge represents dependence between random variables. Shaded nodes are observed, that's a shaded node. Unshaded nodes are hidden, and plates, these rectangles, denote replication. Okay, and so what this does is this little graph represents a factorized joint probability distribution over a collection of random variables, some of which are hidden and some of which are observed. Okay, and so that generative process that I described for you in the cartoon, you can read it off this graphical model, where I have a bunch of topics, so each beta is a distribution over terms. I have k of them, k is like 100, say. And then for each document, I first choose a distribution over topics. Theta, that's the cartoon histogram, the topic proportions. And then for each word in each document, I choose a colored button from theta, and then I choose a word from the corresponding distribution over terms. Okay, this is a graphical model. We like graphical models because, first, this is a visual picture of the factorization of the joint distribution, and that tells us something about the model. Two, this encodes independence assumptions about the variables, right? So I can read off, using D-separation, all of the various independencies and conditional independencies between the imagined hidden structure, and I can ask questions like, does that match my intuitions about how I want to be thinking about topics and words together? And 3, most importantly, these graphs connect directly to algorithms for computing about the data. So remember, what we want is the conditional distribution of all the hidden variables given the observations. Notice the only observation is the words of the documents, WDN, and I want to calculate the conditional distribution, and this graph suggests to me algorithms, not just to me, to everybody, algorithms for performing those computations. Okay, and they're modular too, so you can. I'll show you that later in the talk. You can take this graphical model, plug it into another one, and the algorithms compose in similar ways. Okay, so in more detail, this joint distribution we just defined over topics, proportions, buttons, and words defines a posterior, the conditional distribution of all the hidden variables given the observations. And once I calculate that posterior, I can infer things like the topic assignments, the topic proportions, and the topic distributions. And then I can use posterior expectations of those hidden variables to perform the task at hand, to build an information retrieval system or a recommender system, to calculate document-document similarity based on topics, to explore the collection, to visualize events, things like that. Okay, and that's what I meant in the beginning of the talk when I said that we first learn the topics, then we annotate the documents according to those topics, and then we use those annotations to do whatever it is we want to do. So you basically pretend that you had a bunch of people annotating and organizing these documents for you, and then what would you do with the output of what they did for you in order to build your system or do what it is you were trying to do with documents. Okay. We can't calculate that posterior. Most interesting models, the posterior is intractable, but there are many ways to try to approximate it. Okay, it's become kind of almost like a benchmark graphical model for approximate inference algorithms for some class of them anyway. And these are all different algorithms for approximating that posterior. I won't talk about any of them. Okay, but we're gonna use mean field variational methods and stochastic inference in this talk. Okay, perhaps more interesting, a lot of those algorithms are implemented in open source software packages. Okay, here's a partial list. And so these are all packages that in some way or another implement this topic model. And so if you have a collection of data that you wanted to try this kind of thing out on, you could download one of these and try it out right now. Yeah? About what? I don't know that one. Big RTM? Ah, okay. I mostly code in LaTeX these days. So I've used my own code. I mean, I'm like everybody. I like my own code the best. So I've used that. I've used Mallet, and I've used LDA and R a lot. But, you know, I think a lot of people like scikit-learn, and but no, I hadn't heard of that one. But I can add it to this list. Yeah. It implements LDA too? Oh, it's better than LDA. That's a different thing. Yeah. There's a lot better than LDA. So let's take a look at this in practice a little bit. So this is a very small example. We take 17,000 documents, that's very small, 11 million words, vocabulary of 20,000 terms, and we fit a 100-topic LDA model. Okay, so just to be clear, I have this big stack of science articles, I ingest it, and I approximate the posterior using, in this case, mean field variational inference. And here's that original article that I showed you, and now I get P of beta, theta, and Z given all the words in the documents, and I can ask the question, what's the posterior expectation of theta, right, the topic proportions for this particular article, and what I see is that it's got like a handful of the topics activated. Okay, so I ingested all the articles, I learned 100 topics, here are my 100 topics in the x-axis, and here are the topics that are somehow activated for this article. All right, now remember, each topic is a distribution over terms, right, so each topic has some words with high probability in them, and I can look at the most frequent terms from the most frequent topics for this article, and you see that they revolve around the subjects that we said in the beginning this article is about: genetics, evolutionary biology, data analysis, survival. Okay? That's the idea. Of course, now we can do this using stochastic variational inference, but again, that was a long list of algorithms. A lot of them are good. we can do this at large scale. So here's an example of topics learned from 2 million New York Times articles, and this is just done on a laptop, okay, using stochastic optimization. Okay. Good. So I said we were not going to talk about algorithms. We're not. But when you're working with graphical models, whether or not even when you're not thinking about the algorithm, you can still understand something about how the model works. And it goes beyond the generative process, and it involves thinking about the posterior. Okay, so I learned a lot by just doing this for LDA. Basically, what did I do? I took LDA, I wrote down the posterior. The posterior is proportional to the joint, right? So I wrote down the log joint, and then asked, just with a piece of paper in an empty room, what configurations of hidden variables are going to make this log joint large? Okay, you ask that question, and you learn a lot about what you might expect your model to do in an ideal case when you can calculate the posterior. Okay, so if you do that for LDA, I recommend doing it for all kinds of things like mixture models and regression and analysis. But if you do that for LDA, you see that it's trading off two goals. Okay, one goal is that in each document, it wants to allocate words to few topics. Okay, it wants, in other words, the topic proportions to be sparse. And the reason is because the topic proportions have to normalize. Okay, that's what forces them to be sparse. Two, mirroring this goal, in each topic, LDA wants to assign high probability to very few terms. Again, because the topics normalize. Okay, so it wants documents to allocate words to few topics and topics to have very few terms in each with high probability. And these goals are at odds, right? If I put a document in a single topic, then that topic has to cover all of the words in that document. Okay, and if I put very few words in each topic, then I need to use many topics to cover the words of a document. Okay, and so what the posterior of LDA is doing is trading off these two goals to find these groups of words that co-occur tightly, right? And that's what these topics are. Okay, and that's also why you see pictures like this, where a document, even though it's got many different words in it, is going to be covered by only a small group of topics. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about LDA. LDA discovers themes in big collections of documents by using posterior inference. Just to give you some history of this, LDA really builds on the seminal work in cognitive science and machine learning on latent semantic analysis, right, which was the first time scholars took document by term matrices and factorized them. Right, and this is the work by Deerwester et al., 1990. Now, in the late 90s, Thomas Hoffman worked on something called probabilistic latent semantic analysis, which was trying to build a probabilistic version of latent semantic analysis, and that's called the aspect model, or PLSA. And what LDA does is build basically a fully Bayesian and properly generative version of Thomas Hoffman's original model. As I mentioned, in statistics, this idea is called mixed membership, and it's used all over the place to analyze survey data and to analyze network data, to analyze text data. If you know about PCA and you know about probabilistic PCA, then you can, by marginalizing out this little variable z, you can reinterpret LDA as a type of exponential family PCA, where you're drawing multinomial observations, and you have a Dirichlet prior on your factor loadings. I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, this idea was independently invented for genetics. This is the famous Pritchard-Stevens-Donnelly model in population genetics. Okay, and some work we've been doing, for example, has been to take the algorithms that we developed for LDA and port them to the genetics setting in order to scale up the genetics algorithms. That's genetics algorithms, different from genetic algorithms. Okay, so why might LDA be interesting? Well, organizing and finding patterns in text is important all over the place, right? Many different fields have big collections of text and they want to organize them. That historian, biologists, others. LDA has kind of, responding to this, become a building block that enables a lot of applications. All right, and the reason I think there are two reasons. One is that graphical models compose the way I described. And so here's a picture of a bunch of different models from the research literature, each of which uses LDA as a little submodel. You can see LDA is there. You can see LDA is there. You can see LDA there. It's a piece of these larger models. And what's nice is that the algorithms for these bigger models use whatever innovations we collectively might have done for LDA as little subroutines, right? The algorithms compose the same way that the models compose. Second, new algorithms for graphical models now scale to massive data. I know I'm not talking about algorithms today, but what's nice is that we now have approaches to performing inference in many of these types of models that can scale up to the kinds of data that we regularly see. And I'll get to this picture again at the end, but I want to mention it now, in case we don't get to the end, which is that what's really happening with LDA is that it's a case study in using probability models to do text analysis. And I like to think of probability models in this, you might think it's vacuous, in this little pipeline, where I have my knowledge about the world and a question I want to ask. I use that to make assumptions, and that I turn those assumptions mathematically into a model, one that has hidden variables and observed variables. Then my data and my assumptions together are squared off in the posterior. That's where I discover the patterns in the data, calculate the conditional distribution of the hidden variables given the observations. And finally, I use those discovered patterns to form predictions about the future, to explore my data, etc. Okay, and so if you look at the landscape of topic modeling research, it's about developing new models, expanding these assumptions, developing new inference algorithms, but you saw that list, so it's probably done, and developing new applications, visualizations, tools, ways of using these kinds of topic models. And we'll get back to this picture more generally at the end of the talk. Okay, so next I want to tell you a little bit about our work on collaborative topic models, which is an example of using LDA in the context of a bigger setting. This is joint work with Prem Gopalan and Laurent Charlin, who I think is your student, but your University of Toronto's proud graduate, and Chong Wang. Okay, so again, people read documents on the subway, also Charles Darwin. What collaborative topic models do is connect the content of what people are reading to patterns of how they read. Okay, and so let me give you our example is going to again be scientific articles. Okay, so probably many of you have BibTeX files on your computers, and what we want to do is take in all of your BibTeX files as data. All right, so scientists share their research libraries. Okay, and so that gives us a matrix like this, where your users are in the columns and academic papers are in the rows, and you can see that you have a filled-in cell when a user has that paper in his or her library. Okay, so for example, here's the EM paper. All right, and so Rich might have the EM paper in his library. All right, here is the Introduction to Variation Methods for Graphical Models paper, and Tomi might have that paper in his library. This is the data we have. Okay, now what can we do with this data? Well, we can do a few things, as I mentioned. One, we can help readers discover documents. In other words, recommendation, both old and new. That's a poorly written bullet. It's not that we can help both young and old readers find documents. It's that we can help readers find both old documents and new documents that no one else has read. So this is the cold start problem, because it only works for old people. We can also describe readers in terms of topical preferences. So if you're familiar with recommendation systems, the kind of workhorse method for recommendation systems is matrix factorization, where everybody's represented as just some kind of abstract set of weights in an abstract space. In the work I'm going to present to you, the representation of people is in terms of topical preferences. So I'll be able to say, if you're part of dimension 57, 57 is about computer vision. And then finally, and I alluded to this in the beginning, we can identify documents that are impactful and interdisciplinary. Okay, so that's, I think, it's exciting. If I take this kind of data and the text, I can figure out which of these articles has had an impact on disciplines that it's not necessarily talking about. Okay, so to give you the intuition, we're going to think about EM paper. All right, so how many of you are familiar with the EM algorithm? Great, so most of you. How many of you have read the EM paper? Okay, that's like less than 5. How many of you have the EM paper in your BibTeX file? You should be citing the EM paper. Okay, so the EM paper, for those of you that don't know, so what's EM? EM is an algorithm for finding maximum likelihood estimates of parameters in the face of hidden variables. It's related to the stuff we're talking about here, right? I have hidden variables, and instead of a posterior, I want an MLE. This talk is not about EM, but anyway, that's what it is, okay? It was written about in the late 70s by some very heavy-hitting statisticians. It was invented before that. There's, I think, papers about the history of the EM algorithm, but this is the paper that put it all together in the late 70s. And the EM algorithm has had a huge impact well beyond statistics, okay? It's had an impact in many, many, many fields, right? It's used everywhere. It's very simple, it's intuitive, and it's useful. So we're going to use the EM paper as an example. So it's 1977, and the EM paper just came out. Okay, so the only information you have about the EM paper is this abstract. And if you read the EM paper, which very few of you have, you know that it is basically a dusty, old paper about statistics written in the late 70s. Okay? And so imagine there are 2 topics, computer vision and statistics. If you looked at the EM paper in 1977 and you had to decide what topic it's about, you're going to say it's about statistics. That's all it's about. Okay? Now imagine there's only 2 kinds of people in the world, statisticians and computer vision researchers. Statisticians are interested in statistics, vision researchers are interested in vision. What you're going to first do is recommend the EM paper to statisticians, right? Here's a paper, it's about statistics, I'm going to send it to my friends that are statisticians. Okay, but now fast forward, and we have all this data. Who's reading what? From this data, intuitively, we should be able to see, well, you know, all the computer vision researchers are reading the EM paper. All right, so what I want to do then is adjust my representation of the EM paper as not just being about statistics, but also being about computer vision, in the sense that that describes who's reading it. Okay? Now, consider again my scientists. I'm going to recommend the EM paper both to statisticians and to computer vision researchers. The 2 points I want to make, one, without the text, we could never recommend it to anyone, right? And as soon as the paper comes out, without reading it, I don't know who to send it to. Without the user data, we cannot recommend it to vision researchers, right? The EM paper will always be a dusty statistics paper from the 70s. It's never going to change. But only by looking at this user behavior data do I realize that the EM paper is important to people that are interested in computer vision. Okay, and so this is the graphical model that captures those intuitions. So let me explain. Okay, so you can see first, the easy part, we can see LDA here. All right, so this is going to be our representation of the documents, and I've got D documents just as in LDA. Now, I have some new stuff. The U plate here, these are users, okay? And so XU is going to be the preferences of user U. VUD is whether or not user U has document D in her library. And Zeta D is what we're going to call, I called it the correction. I can't think of a good name for it. I'm now going to call it the adjustment, okay? And so let me explain how this works. So we imagine documents are drawn as for LDA. So every document has its topics that it's about. EM paper is about statistics. And now I have all these users and what articles they're reading, okay? Whether or not user U read article D depends on 3 variables. First, it depends on the user U's preferences. And those are a k-vector, okay? So the user U's preferences are a vector of length equal to the number of topics. Okay, so this is going to be in the posterior how much you like each topic, but that's what XU is. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask, you know, take the dot product of your preferences, user U's preferences, with the topics that the paper is about, okay? So if you like statistics and the paper is about statistics, that's going to give you a high probability of liking that paper, plus the dot product with the adjustment. and XU. And the adjustment is also a K vector over a number of topics. And its purpose, it's basically a free variable, a free random variable that I can use to explain the votes that are, or to explain the clicks or the reads that are not well explained by the connection between the topics and the preferences. Okay, does that make sense? It basically, so theta has to describe both the words and the ratings, or the reads, and zeta is a free variable to help me explain those reads that are not well explained by theta. And notice that theta is responsible for two types of observations, but zeta is only responsible for the reads. That's what gives zeta that power. Zeta is the adjustment. It's adjusting my representation of the document to help explain who's reading it. Question? Hey, Quaid.
Is it a Dirichlet variable? Are they all positive, or can they be positive and negative?
Mm-hmm. Right now, they're all positive. So, you know, if I write a paper all about something, but it's really terrible and nobody reads it, we cannot downgrade the paper. Yep. Yep. So this answers your question. Here, so the idea, this is the idea. This is really all you need to understand, I think. But if you're interested in the details, here are some details. So what I have is that I know theta was a Dirichlet, now it's a gamma. Pretend it's whatever you want it to be. Theta and zeta are both positive, and V and X is positive too. So you can only have positive preferences for things. And then whether or not you read something comes from a Poisson or it could be a Bernoulli. Okay? Poisson is nice because it gives us this additive structure, and Poisson on binary data, you'll just have to believe me, is not crazy. That somehow if you have many, many, many items, it's like you have a Poisson process, and the chance of seeing two clicks in the same place are really small anyway, so it's a good approximation. This is the mathematical structure. Okay, and what this is doing intuitively is blending content-based recommendation, where I use the topics to decide who might like something, and factorization-based recommendation, the classical Netflix-like thing, except this Poisson gamma version. All right, it builds on what's called Poisson factorization, which has been looked at in over the course of a decade. Okay, so other questions about this? Yeah.
So is there a plan data to be small? Like what's preventing it from just explaining it with the correction and not with the topic of something else?
That's a good question. So we do have sparse priors on all of these gamma distributions. I think what's happening is that theta, because it explains, so theta has to explain the words, all right? And now, if I can, because of the sparse gamma prior, I get benefit when things are small in zeta. So if I can explain something with theta, then I will. We're going to use theta to explain this particular read if we can, because theta is already sitting there explaining all the words. And so zeta really can only, you know, zeta pays money, not real money. Zeta pays for high values anywhere, and so zeta is going to spend its chips, not real chips, spend its probability mass on the components that are not already in theta. However, you can tell I don't have a great answer to your question. What I would do is the same thing we did with LDA. I would write down that log joint and then ask yourself, okay, what configurations would have high probability here? Good. Okay. So we have a big data set from Mendeley. Mendeley, they got bought at some point, but they were a company that people could share their BibTeX files on. Okay? So we have 261,000 documents, 80,000 users, and these are the statistics around the documents themselves. These are abstracts. Okay? Here's the EM paper. Okay, this is the abstract. A broadly applicable algorithm for computing maximum likelihood estimates, blah, blah, blah. And you can see that this is really a paper in wherever it was, JRSSB, in the 70s. Okay? Here is our topic representation. Okay, so this is the first half of the talk. All right, so I found 500 topics here, and this is the representation of the EM paper according to those topics. Okay, and you can see, as usual, it's about a few topics, and the main topics are probability models and algorithms, which is indeed a good summary of what the EM paper is about. It's an algorithm for fitting probability models. Now what I'm going to do, remember I can adjust the representation with zeta, so I'm going, and if you look back at the math, the distribution of the rating has to do with theta plus zeta. That's like the rating representation dotted with the preferences. So I'm going to add the adjustment vector to this vector, and this is what you see. Okay, so we can kind of flip back. Oh, wow, I could do something even cooler. Oh, this is great. Oh, wait, this is what I want. Right. Wait, how did this? Oh, this is the previous one?
If you go backwards, it's
Okay. Anyway, that's got to be. Can I see something? I see. Okay. Okay. So now look, I've never been able to do this before. So here is the topic representation. Here is the representation that explains who's reading the paper, and you can see the difference, right? First of all, within algorithms, the EM paper is in a lot of people's library. Okay, clearly you're not Mendeley users, but within algorithms, it's in a lot of people's library, and that's interesting. So you know, this tells me how many of the words of the abstract are about algorithms. You know, that's something. But Zeta is now spending some of its capital on adding to that part of the representation. But more interesting are these topics that come out of the weeds, right? So here's computer vision. The EM paper has nothing to do with computer vision, but to represent who's reading it, we want to say that people who are interested in computer vision are interested in EM. And here is network analysis, okay? Also where EM is important in community detection and statistical network analysis. Okay, so that's the idea. And when I give this talk in a regular place, you can flip back and forth between them to see how they kind of change. Okay. Okay. 10 to 1, 110. Okay. You've all seen talks. This is the part of the talk where we say that it does better. All right. And so, you know, there's some interesting stuff here. So on the left is, so we're testing this in two scenarios. One scenario, we take all the users, we hold out like 10% of each of their clicks or reads, and we then try and these are right, and we try to predict if they're going to read them, okay, based on their history. And these are papers that other people have read, like the EM paper, okay. And so this is the classical recommendation held out likelihood or mean precision and average precision type of evaluation. And we compared a bunch of different stuff. We compared independently fitting content and collaborative, just doing collaborative, just doing content, and then our method. And our method is the line on top, as it is in every talk. Here, this is the cold start problem. Okay, so now what we did was we took away the EM paper completely. All right, so nobody gets to read it. And then we just look at the content and we ask who is going to read the EM paper. And what you can see is that we do, I guess, a little bit better even, or sometimes a little bit better than content only, but roughly the same as content only, which is what you would expect. Now what's cool, why do we get this gap, is that the binary distinction between cold start and warm start is arbitrary. There's really a spectrum, right? If you have a million papers and there's a paper that only 2 people have seen, well, that's practically a cold start problem. You don't have a lot of information about that paper in order to make it a classical warm start or regular recommendation type of prediction. And so what this model does is smoothly changes things, right? At first, it's relying mostly on theta to make predictions, but then as more and more people read papers, it starts getting a better idea of its representation of who's reading it and who likes it, and it uses theta plus zeta more forcefully. Okay. As I told you, I'm interested in this idea that the readers also tell us about the articles. And so we can use those posterior estimates to find interdisciplinary articles, influential articles within a field, and outside influences on a field. I should give you the caveat that this is all exploratory. So this is not like a causal inference with a p-value type of situation. It's more we can find suggestions of these types of articles by using the posteriors. So how does this work? One of the topics is about statistical network analysis, as I mentioned. It's got words like network, connected, modules, nodes, links, topology, and so on. And it's about doing things like uncovering overlapping communities and networks. Okay? And so with LDA, and this is what we've done for a lot of years, and other people do this too, you can use just the text to explore the data using the topics. How do you do that? Well, you say, okay, I care about that topic, so I'm going to set some threshold for how much each document's about this topic, and I'm going to look at the documents that are about the topic at least that much. Okay? And that's one way to get network papers. Okay? And so this is what we did. Here's what you get. You say, okay, which papers are about networks? Well, you get these 2 papers by Mark Newman, which are excellent papers, and they really are only about networks, and this other paper that's about networks. Okay? And what does this mean? Well, this means that when I analyzed the words of this paper, it was more about networks than other papers. That's what that means. Okay, but we can now, with our user behavior data and our adjusted representation and our meaningful dimensions of the preference and item representations, we can ask, let's add theta and zeta for networks and organize the papers that way. So what is this? This is which papers are about networks. So I'm still going to filter on papers that are at least so much about networks. Which papers are about networks, but that are interesting to people who mostly read or who are interested in networks. Okay, and what you see is this set of papers. These are different papers, and I'll be honest with you. In this case, I haven't read these papers. I have read these papers. These are great papers. These papers appeared in glossier magazines. So these papers appeared in like Science and Nature and stuff like that. But that's not the point. The point is we're getting the papers that more people have in their libraries. Okay, by doing this. More interesting, we can say, okay, let's find out which papers are about networks, but people in other fields read those papers. Okay, so what does that mean? Again, I filter on networks, but now I take the sum of the adjustments of all the other topics, not networks. I omit networks from that sum, and I organize the papers according to that sum. Okay, so these are papers that other people like that are about networks. And what do we see? Well, you see 2 types of papers emerge. We could probably divide this up into a more fine-grained type of exploratory analysis. But 2 types of papers emerge. One are interdisciplinary papers. These are papers about using network analysis in the context of neuroscience and ecology and evolution. And this is like a popular science book about networks, where lots of people have it in their library, people that are interested in all kinds of things. Okay, and so again, going back to the beginning of this part of the talk, without both types of data, you could not find, if you were interested in interdisciplinary network analysis papers, you couldn't find these kinds of things. Okay, and then we can ask the converse, what is not about networks, but that people who like networks like to read? Again, this is disappointing because these are papers written by people who normally write about networks. So it just means that they're all reading each other's papers all the time. But the point is, again, I can ask this interesting question: what are people who like networks reading when they are not reading about networks? Okay, and we can do this for every topic in the collection. So here, I thought this was interesting. It's close to my interests. Statistical modeling. Okay, this is one of the topics. And people who are interested in statistical modeling, when they're reading about statistical modeling in this data set, read about Bayesian nonparametrics, model complexity, and MCMC. Okay? And so these are all good papers about statistical modeling. When you look at people interested in other things, which statistical modeling papers are they reading, you find classic tutorial about HMMs by Robiner, which probably many of you have read. It's the way I learned HMMs. A great paper by David Heckerman about graphical models and Bayesian networks, an early paper, I think it's from 1992, also a very important paper and kind of brought graphical models to other fields. And here's the EM paper, right? So in other fields, the EM paper does not appear up here, okay? And then this less interesting, but when people who like statistical models are reading about other stuff, they're reading about the bootstrap and R and multivariate statistics. Okay? Now that was carefully curated data. I'll go quickly here. That was carefully curated data. We also have archive clicks. Okay, so we have people clicking on the archive for 10 years. All right, so Mendeley, I know how you are. If you're going to put something in your BibTeX file, you think really hard before you do that because it's a big commitment to that paper. But this is like you wake up at 3 in the morning and you're an insomniac and you just go to the archive to see what happened. What did you miss since 1 in the morning when you went to bed? Okay, and so this is just, you're absent-minded clicking on the archive, and we collected it all, or they collected it and gave it to us, and we can, I don't have those interdisciplinary results here, but again, we see the same kinds of pictures. So this works well with implicit data that is kind of abstractly collected, like you on the archive. Finally, this was interesting. So I found out that some colleagues, Mark Hoffman and Peter Behrman, Mark Hoffman's a PhD student and Peter Behrman's a sociologist, used this same model to analyze people. Okay, so, my story was always we can do recommendations and then we can analyze documents. Well, they're using it to analyze people. They have data from the New York Society Library. That's a picture of the old version of the New York Society Library. It was the first library in New York City from 1754. And their data is from they have data of the books and descriptions of the books in the library, and then they have the people who are checking out books from the library. And these are people like Aaron Burr. All right, so this is in New York was the head of the center of government back then, and so these are like the founding fathers of the United States checking out books at the library, and they're interested in what they're reading. Okay, and they actually independently found our code and ran it, and so they've shared their results with me. So this is data from 1789 to 1806. There's 847 people, like John Jay, Aaron Burr, who I'm going to show you in a second. They have 2,300 items and 33 million words of vocabulary of 8,000. Okay, so now they looked at the documents, but they care about the people. So I don't know very much about U.S. history. It's embarrassing, but there was this great rift between they were called the Democratic Republicans. They're not like today's Republicans who don't check out many books from the library, but they're Democratic Republicans who were kind of into states' rights and like the French Revolution and kind of more what we think of as kind of left wing. And then there were the Federalists who were more interested in tight connections to Britain. They were more of the elite class, and there was a big rift between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. And you can kind of see this. So Aaron Burr is a famous Democratic Republican, and you can see what he's reading, English Parliament, French Revolution, and so on. And John Jay, a Federalist, is reading more classical things like Christian theology, Northern Kingdoms, of course, zoology. And so, Aaron Burr is famous because he was in the duel with Hamilton, which then led to a hit Broadway musical. So I thought this was cool because this is like using these collaborative topic models to learn or at least be suggestive about people and to help them, to the sociologist, it was amazing to him because he just gets this data of who checked out what, and he can kind of mindlessly search through it. But this gives him a structure with which to explore it. Okay, so collaborative topic models connect text to usage, blends content-based and user-based recommendation, and opens new windows to how people read. Okay, so in the last 5 minutes, I want to just discuss the bigger field that these two ideas are part of. Okay. So, yeah, people are starving. All right, I won't rush. So, traditional machine learning. How do you solve problems with traditional machine learning? Well, you take a cookbook of methods, a shoehorn, and duct tape. Okay? And you basically do what you would do with those three things. All right, and you can get very far that way. Probabilistic machine learning, which is what we've been talking about, is about tailored models for the problem at hand. Models that kind of reflect your knowledge and assumptions about the structure of the world that you want to model. I'm not trying to sell anything here. Probabilistic machine learning, right? We can compose and connect reusable parts the way that I showed you. It's driven by knowledge and the questions that you have in a discipline. It focuses more on discovering and using structured and unstructured data. This is versus non-parametric methods, for example. And it also tends to focus on exploratory, observational, and causal analyses. Okay, so a lot of places where you see these models come up is when we're doing causal inference from observational data and we want to make certain assumptions, and we use these models to think about those assumptions. Okay, well, the classical cookbook shoehorn duct tape technique, there are many software packages available. It's very fast, and it's effective. Probabilistic modeling can be more challenging to implement, may not be fast or scalable, although that's something that those of us working in probabilistic machine learning are working on. Okay, so here's the big picture, the way I see things. Statistics, machine learning, and data science are all the same thing, and inside that is probabilistic modeling, and then today we've been talking about topic modeling. I used to put it in the center, but that gave the wrong impression. Okay, so it's just one piece of this bigger picture of doing high-dimensional data analysis with probability models. Okay? I always get asked about this, so this is not to scale, but there are other components, of course, of machine learning. Okay, so what is probabilistic modeling? Well, one, we assume our data comes from a model that has hidden patterns at work. Remember this picture. Two, we then discover those patterns from data, inference. Okay, so I didn't talk about inference, but in all of the results I showed you, we're solving an optimization problem like this to approximate that posterior. And then three, we use the discovered patterns, the results of that inference, to do whatever it is we're going to do. Okay, so visualize population genetics, form predictions, learn about the brain, etc. Okay, so this is the probabilistic pipeline, which I like because it separates these key activities, right? So somebody can walk into my office, a sociologist or a neuroscience scientist, and somehow without knowing anything about probability models, everybody can draw graphical models on the whiteboard. All right, they draw circles for the things that they don't for the different objects hidden and observed at play. They think about how they interact and draw arrows for how they interact. And in the end, the whiteboard is filled with some kind of complex model that has some things shaded and some things unshaded. Then my students and I can work on developing the algorithms to uncover the hidden structure that the scientific expert believed lived in her data. We can develop the algorithms to uncover that structure, the model, and then we call the scientist back and show the results, and then form predictions, explore, and so on. Okay, so this makes it easy to collaborate when solving these kinds of problems. Also suggests what kinds of tools we need to lubricate this pipeline. So one, flexible and expressive components for building models. So I feel like things like Bayesian nonparametrics falls into this category. We want, if somebody has some crazy assumptions, we want to be able to capture those assumptions in the context of a probability model. And that involves thinking about different kinds of components that are reusable. Two, scalable and generic inference algorithms. So if you went to Rajesh's talk, you heard about both of those, I hope, which he has made huge progress on. That's where we want to do inference of the hidden variables given the observations. And, like in the late 90s and 2000s, you wrote a model down, and then you had to sit there and derive the inference algorithm just for that model. Okay, but if you want to lubricate this pipeline, you want to be able to quickly try out many, many models, and that means that we have automated ways that means that we need automated ways to perform inference, ways that are generic to large model classes. And there's been a lot of progress on that. Things like the reparameterization gradient and black box variational inference and variation encoders, and this whole kind of class and flurry of work in variational inference is seeking these generic inference methods. Finally, we need easy-to-use software to stretch probabilistic modeling to new areas, which to me is also part of just working on new kinds of problems and trying to tackle different kinds of assumptions and different kinds of questions with this pipeline. Of course, it's not a pipeline, it's a loop. So, as I mentioned, in the 90s, you would make an algorithm, and it took a long time, like a year or more, and so then you're married to your model. You can't, to change your model would require going back to school. And so But if we could lubricate this pipeline, if we can make it easy to use, then after we predict and explore, we should criticize our model. We should understand where it goes, where it does well, where it falls short, and use that criticism to revise the model. And model criticism is interesting because this is a field that was really discussed a lot in the 80s and 90s by Bayesian statisticians. People like Don Rubin and George Box, Andrew Gelman, Xiaoli Meng wrote a lot of beautiful papers on posterior predictive checks and other methods for doing model evaluation. And we're poised right now in probabilistic machine learning to revive these ideas, to think about how to do that with the kinds of elaborate models that we've been coming up with. Okay, and so one of my graduate students, Dustin Tran, is working on a Python library for doing this, probabilistic modeling, inference, and criticism. And this library is meant both for people who want to apply probability models, but also, and maybe especially, for people who want to do research into this area. And so I suggest you check that out. Okay, that's what I talked about. Thanks very much. Yeah.
So, your correction factor, but I think it's really a causal model. I don't think it's correction factor, something that identify purposes. Correction was not explainable by your model.
Yeah.
How do you want to criticism of your model? How would you improve that model and take it to the next step?
Right, that's a good question. So we'll go to that. Where is it? Here. Yeah, so, you know, this picture is cool. So this picture is from a paper called, I can't remember what it's called, but by George Box, 1980 something, Science and Robustness and Modeling. And George Box's argument is this: if you write down a model, P of Z and X, where Z is hidden and X is observed, and you get a posterior P of Z given X, and you start pretending like that posterior is real, you know, you've already assumed that the model is true. And if you want to check the model, what you need to do is somehow step outside of that world where the model's true. And so the way he describes doing that is by saying, okay, I have a model, P of Z and X. I get P of Z given X. Now I'm going to generate new data from that model. So I'm going to generate P of X new given X, right, given my data. And then I'm going to ask, is that X new similar or different from the actual data that I observed? And his argument, there's a problem with it, but it's loosely good, is that if they are similar, then that's evidence that your model is a decent model. And what's cool is that you get to define what similar means. There might be some aspects of the world that you care about modeling, and there might be some aspects that you don't. So with a recommendation system, what you can do is you could generate a bunch of user behavior data from your model, from that adjustment model, and then ask, how does this relate? How does this look according to various summary statistics or plots? How does this look compared with my original data? And you might find some interesting things. For example, you might find that you are predicting better for people that look at a lot of papers, but not well for people that don't look at a lot of papers. And that might not be something you want, because you care about people, not necessarily only the people that look at a lot of papers. So that would be the approach I would take. And in recommendation systems particularly, there are problems with biases towards popular papers and towards people that click on many, many things. Those people also can be idiosyncratic, and they can drive your representations of the papers and the people away from where you would otherwise want them to be. Yeah. Yeah.
Another question. EM algorithm.
Yeah.
Local optimization, right? How do you deal with this? Not really global optimization.
Ah, right. So again, the EM algorithm was just an example in this talk.
No, but you use EM for LDA.
But I did it. Yeah. That was the next thing I was going to say. But it's true that in our approximate inference method, which is variational inference, we have local optima. And so I don't have a great answer to that question. Random resets is one way to handle it. Stochastic optimization seems empirically to get to better local optima than the classical methods of coordinate ascent do. Annealing helps. So people have been exploring annealing in these contexts to get to better local optima. And I also think model checking needs to be about both the model and the approximate inference algorithm that you use, because a simple model with exact inference might do better than a complex model with approximate inference. Although my experience, it's anecdotal, is that usually the complex model and approximate inference is better than the simple model with exact inference if your problem is complex. That said, this is a great area for open research. So understanding the theoretical qualities of the optima that we get when we run variational inference, or understanding the nature of this objective function, is a wide open area. Yeah. Yeah.
Question, but I'm wondering the following: like, if you were to use like these types of models to learn what to read, you're likely going to be the last person reading that paper. So what about actually trying to understand what papers should be read?
Right. So you're saying that once you have enough data that tells you to read the paper, it's old news. So like if you're a stockbroker, that's a bad situation. Or research. Yeah, well, we're all stockbrokers, right? Yeah, that's a good question. So, I haven't thought about it. I suppose one possibility is to think about a time series. I mean, this is a kind of holy grail for people that are interested in understanding scientific impact, is to somehow find patterns, predictors of future scientific impact. But if you had a time series model, you could learn something about the slope of the change of adjustment of a paper and say, hey, computer vision researchers are starting to read the EM paper. You're a computer vision researcher. You won't be totally ahead of the curve, but a little bit.
Like an elaborated cold start.
Yeah, that's right. It would be a cold start with a slope. Yeah. And then you might even be able to learn patterns of what has a high slope. That would be the holy grail aspect of it. Question. What's that? I don't think it's been done. So, Laurent Charlin, the graduate of U of T who worked on this, he worked on something with dynamic preferences. So, maybe some of the math that he did could be used for this purpose, but it was different. That was more about, right now you're interested in computer vision, but then your interests are slowly changing, and now you're interested in genetics. And so he wanted to capture that. But this would be at the paper level, how a paper changes. That would be interesting. And then doing kind of one step ahead forward prediction in order to form the recommendations, which would be cool. Yeah. Yeah.
In the chart that you showed where the EM model had a lot of interest in research, it also didn't seem to have a lot of interest from statisticians. And I was wondering if that's a negative signal for statisticians.
You mean the probability models piece? Let me go to that plot.
Okay. So it looked like...
Oh, I see. Like this one, it just put a little bump there. Yeah.
The same as any other topic.
Yeah, and that was borne out by the looking at the top papers according to statistical modeling. Yeah, though it is interesting to statisticians. I mean,
that's not actually a negative signal.
So there are no negatives aren't possible here.
Right, but just to the relevance of the concept, there doesn't seem to be a lot of there's a lot of charge in that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
To me, it seems like relatively it's...
Yeah, maybe. I mean, you can interpret it that way. I think there's also, you have to keep in mind the bias in the data set. So Mendeley is probably a lot of computer scientists. And so, this is not an equal sample of statisticians and computer scientists. So, but right, subject to all of those caveats, yeah, in this data set, it does. I agree with you. I would think that's a fair interpretation of this. Yeah. Oh, there's one more question, or is... All right, we'll leave. Thanks.